Welcome to The Debate. So I want you to imagine standing directly underneath a massive steel railway bridge.
Okay, sounds loud.
Oh, it is. There's a heavy freight train rolling overhead. The entire structure is just vibrating. The noise is absolutely deafening, and you can physically feel the pressure in your chest.
Right.
But if you look at the master structural engineer who's inspecting that bridge, they aren't looking at the whole structure. They are staring at one very specific connection point on one specific beam. They are completely ignoring the thousands of tons of steel vibrating all around them.
Because they know exactly where it's going to break.
Exactly. They know a fundamental law of physics. A structure only ever fails at its weakest load path. And today, we're taking that exact engineering principle and applying it to how we design and scale business operations.
Which is a whole different beast, honestly.
Well, yes and no. We're talking about architecting the flow, right? How you find the governing bottleneck in any system. And my position today is that the supreme skill of the true business architect is its radical subtraction and singularity.
Singularity. Okay.
Yes, it is having the intense discipline to isolate the single governing bottleneck, that one rusted bolt, and just ruthlessly ignore the other 90% of issues screaming for your attention.
Right. And I maintain that while singular focus is, a fantastic diagnostic lens, treating your governing bottleneck as this static, isolated target is a fundamental trap.
A trap? Come on!
It is. Because unlike that steel bridge, a business is a highly dynamic living ecosystem. I mean, the moment you relieve pressure at one point in a flow, the failure mode doesn't just vanish, it instantly relocates.
Well, sure, eventually.
Instantly relocates. Therefore, the true mark of architectural skill isn't just isolating the immediate constraint, it's holistic predictive design.
Okay, predictive design.
Yeah, it's anticipating exactly where that failure mode is going to jump to next, rather than obsessing over a localized fix that, frankly, might just accelerate a totally new crisis downstream.
All right, let's lay out the foundation of this subtraction argument first, because I think it's where most business owners and, honestly, even many consultants get entirely lost.
Fair enough. Lay it out.
The absolute core principle of system architecture is that only one bottleneck governs at any given time. Not two, not five, one.
Right.
The deepest, arguably the most difficult part of mastering this skill is having the nerve to look at a dozen real, totally valid problems in a business and just rule them out, because they do not govern the immediate output.
You have to ignore the noise.
You have to. Going back to our structural engineering analogy, if you are building a truss for a roof, you don't over-engineer and reinforce every single steel member. You find the member at the critical section under the governing load case, and you size for that alone.
Well, obviously, because adding steel to a member that wasn't going to fail just adds dead weight.
Exactly. It adds weight, it adds massive cost, but it adds absolutely zero extra capacity to the bridge.
Right.
A business flow operates on the exact same physics. What comes out the end of your business, whether that's shipped products, closed deals, treated patients, whatever, is kept entirely by its weakest stage, not by its average competence.
I agree with the output cap, but
if you strengthen a stage that wasn't the actual cap, you've added cost, you've added frantic activity, but the ultimate output of the business doesn't change by a single dollar. True strategy is finding the one governing bottleneck and pointing all your resources exclusively there.
Okay, look, the physics of your truss analogy are flawless. I'll give you that. But the execution of it in a living system is where this whole singularity argument completely falls apart for me.
Falls apart? That's a bit dramatic.
It's the truth. Yes, one bottleneck governs at a time. I don't dispute that. But business flow is not a dormant piece of steel waiting for a static load. It is a continuous moving current.
Right, it flows.
And when you relieve a bottleneck in a business, it instantly jumps to the next weakest stage. If you treat that governing bottleneck as your sole isolated focus, you aren't being an architect. You're just playing an endless, highly expensive game of whack-a-mole.
I completely disagree with that characterization.
But you are. You fix the immediate leak, sure. The flow increases, the pressure builds violently downstream, and suddenly your client is facing a brand new operational crisis in 6 months. Why? Because the system wasn't ready for the new volume.
But you can't solve tomorrow's volume problem if you don't fix today's restriction first.
True, but a real architect must design the system for where the cap will move next. And, logically, it is absolutely impossible to find that weak member without analyzing the entire continuous flow path from end to end first.
You don't need to analyze everything to find the block.
You do, though. You cannot hyper-focus on a single point until you have mapped the whole ecosystem. If you only look at that one rusted bolt, you might not realize that fixing it and allowing heavier trains to cross will send a tidal wave of stress down to a concrete pillar that is completely unprepared to bear the load.
Okay, I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective.
Go for it.
You can't map an entire business ecosystem effectively without a rigorous filter. If you try to map everything with equal weight, you just get lost in the noise.
Well, you need a good framework, obviously.
Right, but think about it. Every department head thinks their department is the bottleneck. Always. This is where the diagnostic method becomes the ultimate weapon. You don't just map for the sake of mapping. You start by naming the number that pays.
The ultimate metric of output.
Right. You define the one measurable thing that actually keeps the lights on. Usually it's cash collected or successful placements, filled appointments, whatever. From that moment on, every single complaint, every idea, every operational hiccup gets filtered through one ruthless question.
Does it move the number?
Exactly. Does fixing this move that paying number? Then, and only then, do you physically draw the flow on a piece of paper. You trace a single unit, say a single lead, from the second they arrive to the second the money hits the bank.
Which is how you distinguish between a pileup and a leak.
Precisely. A pileup is work sitting in a queue waiting to be processed by a stage. A leak is the drop-off between stages where you lose the unit entirely. But the real magic here, the thing that separates the architect from the technician, is the counterfactual test.
Right, the isolation test.
Yep. You point at the suspected bottleneck and you ask, if only this specific issue were fixed, and absolutely nothing else changed in the entire company, does the paying number move?
And if it doesn't?
If the answer is, well, we'd need to fix X and Y first, then you haven't found the true cap. X is upstream and binds harder. You have to isolate the bolt.
See, I come at it from a different way. The counterfactual test is brilliant in theory, I'll admit that. But to actually execute it accurately, to know for a fact what a pileup or a leak means, you must possess a comprehensive understanding of the entire flow path simultaneously.
Why?
Because you cannot diagnose a leak versus a pileup by just looking at an isolated stage.
Of course you can. If I see 100 leads hit a landing page and only 2 book a call, that's a leak.
But a pileup is relative to the capacity of the stage after it, and a leak is relative to the volume of the stage before it. You are arguing for extreme isolation.
I'm arguing for focus.
But the very act of tracing that single unit from arrival to payment proves that business systems are fluid ecosystems.
Let's make this real for a second. If you're listening to this and you run a business, you know exactly what the noise sounds like.
Oh, definitely.
Your sales team is screaming that the leads are bad. Your marketing team is screaming that sales can't close. Your delivery team is just drowning in backlogs. If you take an isolated approach, you tend to just listen to whoever yells loudest.
But that's exactly why my method ignores the noise. In any system, the loudest complaint is almost never the actual bottleneck.
Well, sometimes it is. Rarely. Clients complain about what annoys them on a daily basis, not what actually costs them the most money. If you try to holistically balance all their complaints without ruthless prioritization, you end up building systems that just appease the loudest manager.
I'm not saying balance complaints. I'm saying map the flow.
Let's move this from theory into reality. Let's talk about the most common and frankly the most expensive misdiagnosis in the field, the demand illusion.
Oh, right. The classic belief that we just need more leads.
Every single time. Nearly every small business owner naturally assumes their bottleneck is at the top of the funnel. They think if they just pour more water into the top, more money comes out the bottom.
Which is rarely true.
Almost never. When you apply the strict diagnostic method, you almost always find the real cap is downstream in internal delivery or in conversion. Take the classic dental clinic example.
Ugh, I love this one. The one where the clinic owner insisted they needed an AI website chatbot to handle demand?
Exactly. The client was absolutely convinced they had a lead generation problem. They wanted to invest heavily in this shiny new tool, a chatbot, to engage website visitors and drive more top-of-funnel demand.
Typical.
Right? A technician would have just built the chatbot and collected their fee. But the architect traced the flow. They mapped a single patient's journey. And they found the real leak wasn't the website traffic at all. It was the empty chair.
The no-shows.
The no-shows and the last-minute cancellations. Think about the mechanics of a dental practice. You have massive fixed costs. The rent on the clinic, the expensive equipment, the dentist's hourly rate.
Yeah, it's a heavy overhead.
Right. And all of that is being paid regardless of whether a patient is actually sitting in the chair. So when a slot opens up at the last minute and goes unfilled, that capacity permanently bleeds out. You can never get that hour back.
It's gone forever.
So what did the architect do? They didn't build a chatbot. They built a localized system perfectly targeted at that isolated bottleneck, a waitlist engine.
An automated system that just watches the calendar?
Exactly. It connects to the calendar, spots a cancellation, instantly cross-references the waitlist for matched patients, texts them the opening, and automatically books whoever replies first.
Which is brilliant.
It requires zero human intervention. The fix was purely localized to filling that empty chair. Precision. Subtraction. They ignored the website entirely, didn't touch the marketing, and fundamentally transformed the profitability of the clinic.
Okay, that is a compelling argument for subtraction. I will give you that. It's a great case study. But have you considered what happens the exact second that dental schedule is perfectly packed?
What do you mean?
Think about it. The waitlist engine works beautifully, right? The chairs are entirely filled. Every no-show is instantly replaced. What happens mechanically to that business?
Their revenue skyrockets.
Yes, for a moment. But the bottleneck immediately relocates. The clinical capacity is now maxed out at 100%. The dentists have absolutely no breathing room. The hygienists are running from room to room.
That's a good problem to have.
Is it if you pour any more demand onto that system? Or if, say, a flu bug takes out one staff member for a day, the entire system breaks. The dentist will burn out, the quality of care will drop, and patients will start leaving negative reviews. Fixing the chair utilization necessitates planning for the next limitation.
But you can't solve a capacity problem you don't have yet.
But you have to know it's coming. Once delivery is maxed out, the bottleneck almost always shifts to cash, meaning the clinic is totally full, and now they need capital to physically open a second clinic to handle any further growth.
Right.
Or the bottleneck shifts to the owner. The architect who only builds the waitlist engine, pats themselves on the back and walks away, hasn't architected a resilient business. They've just accelerated the timeline to the client's next operational crisis.
I'm sorry. I'm just not convinced by that line of reasoning. The mandate of the architect is to solve the governing bottleneck of today. You cannot paralyze a business by over-engineering for the theoretical bottlenecks of tomorrow.
It's not theoretical, it's predictable.
But you fix the chair utilization specifically so that the business generates the cash required to solve the next problem when it actually arises. The waitlist engine funded the second clinic. And actually, this brings us perfectly to the tension between building tools and building systems, which is where the architect really proves their worth.
I agree. This is where the rubber meets the road, because in almost every engagement, the client asks for a tool.
Yes, the recruitment agency asked for an AI to write candidate outreach emails. The B2B SaaS company asked for a shiny new AI feature integrated into their software, just like the dentist asking for a chatbot.
Right. The client always thinks a new tool will fix their flow.
Because tools are easy to buy. Restructuring a flow is hard.
Very hard.
Exactly. And in both cases, the architect's supreme value was having the discipline to strip those requests away. Building the requested AI copywriter for the recruitment agency would have just added weight to the bridge but no capacity.
Because outreach wasn't the issue.
Right. When they traced the flow, the leak wasn't outreach volume. It was candidates going cold because human recruiters were too slow to follow up after the initial interview.
Yep.
So the localized system they built instead was a follow-up engine that flagged stale conversations and prompted the recruiter.
And in the software example?
Same principle. The SaaS company thought they were losing users because they lacked features. But when they measured the flow, the leak was activation.
Users weren't actually using it.
Exactly. Users were signing up, drifting around the dashboard for 2 weeks without actually doing anything, and then churning before they ever formed a habit. Adding a new feature wouldn't fix that. It would just give a confused user more things to be confused by.
Right.
The localized system was an onboarding nudge. It identified a stall in user behavior and proactively injected a frictionless action to bridge the gap. In both cases, the architect's profound value is in not building what the client asked for, but sealing a specific localized leak.
I have to stop you there. I understand your point, but I'm sorry, I just don't buy that framing.
Why not?
Let me tell you why. You are characterizing the architect's value as simply denying the shiny tool and sealing a localized leak. But if you look closely at how those systems actually function, the true value goes much, much deeper.
Okay.
The underlying mechanism in every single one of those successful interventions wasn't just sealing a leak. It was removing the human bottleneck entirely.
Well, yeah, automating a process naturally removes the human.
But it's not just automation for efficiency's sake. In solo and small businesses, the ultimate cap on growth is almost always the owner.
Sure, founder syndrome.
Exactly. The owner is the wedge. Think about how a wedge works in physics. It forces a massive amount of pressure into a tiny single point. In a business, when every operational issue, every escalated client ticket, and every major sales call has to be routed to the founder's desk for a decision, that founder becomes the wedge.
I agree with that.
The surface area of their time is tiny, but the pressure of the entire business flow is forced onto them. So the system grinds to a halt. The recruitment follow-up engine didn't just remind a human to email. It managed the tracking autonomously and only pinged the human when a real decision was needed.
Right.
The SaaS onboarding system automated the setup nudges so the founders didn't have to manually hands-hold new accounts.
That's an interesting point, though. I would frame it a bit differently. The owner is certainly a very common bottleneck, but diagnosing the owner as the problem still requires the exact same discipline of subtraction. You still have to isolate them as the rusted bolt.
But removing them requires a holistic redesign of the load path. You can't just slap a patch on it. The goal of building systems that run while you think isn't just about plugging a hole in candidate outreach or software activation.
It kind of is, functionally.
No, it's about fundamentally redesigning the architecture of the business so that the owner's willpower and memory are no longer the critical section of the truss.
If you view the system as just a series of isolated leaks, you might seal them one by one, but you will constantly be routing the newly optimized flow straight back into the overwhelmed founder.
Unless you fix the founder bottleneck first.
But a predictive architect builds the waitlist engine or the follow-up engine specifically to route the operational load around the owner. You cannot do that if you are only looking at one rusted bolt. You have to understand the entire structure of the organization to reroute the weight safely.
Okay, we are arriving at a crucial juncture here, and I think it highlights the absolute core of our disagreement.
Let's hear it. You argue that the architect must route the load around the owner, anticipating where all that new operational pressure will flow. I argue that the only way to effectively do that, without bankrupting the company with massive, unnecessary software builds, is by forcing every hunch into a financial metric.
Well, sure.
The ultimate test of an architect is their precision. It is the absolute discipline to run the strict counterfactual. If I fix this activation leak and nothing else, does the money move today?
Precision is important, yes. I'm not arguing against precision.
It's not just important, it's everything. It is the discipline to postmortem your own builds, to go back a month later and verify that you actually sized the critical member correctly, rather than getting distracted by the 90% of issues that don't govern the immediate output.
Right.
The precision of targeting the one governing bottleneck is what separates real strategy from mere activity. If you try to predict 3 steps ahead, you end up building systems for problems you don't even have yet, while the current leak bleeds you dry.
And I maintain that because failure modes inherently and inevitably relocate the moment a structural member is strengthened, precision must be paired with foresight.
Foresight is a luxury when the bridge is collapsing.
It's not a luxury, it's the job. If you are a true architect, your ultimate responsibility is mapping the entire flow path from end to end. Yes, you size the immediate fix for the current bottleneck. I agree with that. But you must design that fix with full anticipation of where the system's limitation will jump next.
I just think that's over-engineering. If you don't expect the bottleneck to move, you will be caught completely off guard every single time your localized fix actually works. A successful fix creates a new problem. That is the physics of business flow.
Yet despite our different framing on what happens after the fix, I do think there is a profound point of convergence here.
I think so too.
Whether you are rigorously isolating a single point of failure like I am, or mapping a continuous flow to anticipate the next failure mode like you are, we both agree entirely on the foundational rule of diagnosis.
Which is that you absolutely must physically draw the flow on paper.
You have to. You have to trace a single unit, a single lead, a single patient, a single software user, from the exact moment they arrive in your ecosystem to the exact moment you get paid. Completely agreed. Trying to do it in your head is the hallmark of the technician. You just get lost in assumptions.
Right.
And building the shiny tool the client asks for without diagnosing the actual load path, that is just operational malpractice. You have to find the actual leak, whether you view it as a localized constraint or a shifting node in a larger ecosystem.
So we return to our massive steel bridge, trembling under the weight of the freight train. Whether you are the engineer staring intently at the single rusted bolt, knowing it's the one thing holding the structure together, or the engineer calculating how the vibrations will transfer to the concrete pillars the second that bolt is replaced, you are no longer just laying tracks.
You are architecting the flow.
Exactly. The tension between isolating a single point of failure and anticipating a continuously shifting system is precisely what makes true business architecture so incredibly complex and fascinating. It leaves us to ask, when you look at your own systems or your own business, are you just fixing the noise? Or have you actually found the load path that governs your success?